Hey guys, just wanted to let you know that we do have the PowerPoint from this podcast that's about to play up on the website. So if you guys want to download it to follow along on your end or just as an extra tool for help, go to www.theaveragewaterfowlers.com and you should be able to download it there. Hope you guys enjoy the podcast and learn a lot. Thanks so much. Live. Hey guys, thanks for joining the Average Waterfowlers podcast. This is episode number 2, and we're really excited to have you guys on. Just a little bit of a warning: today's podcast is pretty intense in the content that we're going to be kind of going through. It's very in detail. We just got done doing a run through of it, and it was pretty wild. So what we're talking about today is how we go about scouting up our land. It's just the way we do it. We're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation. So if you are listening to this on iTunes, I would definitely recommend probably hitting pause, come back to it at a later time, and check it out on YouTube because you're going to want to watch the visuals for this. How are you doing today, man? You have a good week so far? You pumped to be on the podcast?
No, it's I'm doing pretty well today. Just got done with work, so working for free.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
just a resume booster, so I can get a real job once I'm out of school. You know how that is.
Hey,
We're back.
we're back. All right, I'll just edit that part out. Um, so, so sweet. Yeah. Just kind of let's touch real quick on our experience with scouting and specifically public land. I mean, like we talked about in the first podcast, at the beginning of our career and still to this day, we hunted a lot of public land. We put a lot of time in scouting for those spots. And this is kind of the methodology that we've come up with to do that specifically from our house, especially if we're planning a destination hunt. Um, you know, we're looking at some spots for this season that are out of the states that we normally hunt. In fact, on a different flyway than what we normally hunt. And the reason we're doing that is twofold. One, the beginning of the season in Mississippi can be a little rough, and so you kind of have to go out there and chase birds if you really want to be on it the whole season. After the first opening weekend where you shoot the local ducks, it's time to kind of go somewhere else. Second reason that we're going to be hunting public land, both in Mississippi and as a destination, is because we don't want to blow out our property that we manage. So we do have a lease. Want to be open about that. That we've been working on and managing for the past few years. We've got a few holes on that lease, but we still do hunt a lot of public land and spend a lot of time on public land and have great hunts on public land. So that being said, go ahead and kind of buckle in and get ready for this. Anything you want to jump into
Yeah,
before we
so
touch on
I,
this?
before we get onto this, first off, this is going to be relatively slow. I think during the rehearsal that we just ran through, I think I found Josh like snoring like 5 times. So uh, no, it is slow. There's a lot of really good information in here, especially if you're looking to go find a public spot and you don't have you even if you're relatively experienced, there's a lot of good information on here. And this is how I choose my public spots. I built this PowerPoint based on what I was going to do if I was going to go on a destination hunt.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. Guys, I don't think you're going to find anywhere on the internet something like this that's as in depth about how we go about doing this. I've never seen anything like this, and I've spent a lot of time looking at duck hunting information. Uh, you're not going to find this anywhere else. I think it's going to be worth anybody's time to listen to this. I even learned some things today, doing a run through. So it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, and so with that being said, the one thing that I would also like to talk about is if you have a lease or say you have property and you're as intense about duck hunting as I am, there's going to be times when you're going to have to go and move because your water's frozen, and this is a really good way to find new spots to hunt when everything's locked up, especially on river systems and lake beds. I guess with that being said, I know it took a while to run through it last time, so we better get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen, and you're going to be seeing this PowerPoint presentation from my screen. Pay attention to the cursor because I will point different things out on maps and imagery. All right. All right, so you should be looking at my screen.
Yeah, it's populating right now, so I'm seeing my reflection.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get into the slide show mode. All right, let me know when you've got my screen.
We've got it. We're up. Legal issues, first slide.
Legal issues, the first slide. All right. So basically, on a destination hunt, if I'm going to be hunting out of state or any new area, these are the legal issues that I'm going to first look at. And the first obvious thing to look at, and we didn't touch on this in the first podcast, and we probably should have. So if you're a beginning waterfowler, this information is incredibly pertinent to you.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing you need to look at is the season dates. All right, in the different states across different states, some states have different zones, in which case the season may start a week or two in advance in Zone 1, Zone 2, or Zone 3. I know in Louisiana we have two zones. We have the coastal zone, which starts earlier, surprisingly, and ends earlier than no, there's three zones. There's coastal, eastern, and western. I think eastern and western have the same dates. Coastal ends earlier, and it has something to do with the availability of fresh water in the marsh and people being able to get out there as the winter goes on. Fresh water goes away for some reason. I think that's what
that makes sense.
From what I've been told, that's why it starts earlier. The next thing you're going to need to look at are the licenses.
Well, let's take a step back. Where are people finding this information?
Okay, so basically where I go to find any information is I find the state that I'm going to hunt in. I go to Google and I type in hunting regulations in Louisiana. And it will usually take you to the Division of Natural Resources page. And from there, you can download a PDF that's going to have every regulation on every type of game within that state. From there, you go down, you scroll down, you find the waterfowl section, and it's going to tell you how many zones there are, what the dates are in each zone. And then it will tell you what you need to hunt, what you need to be legal. And in most states, you're going to have a license, whether it's a resident or non-resident. For me, in a lot of states that I travel to, it's going to be a non-resident license. In some states, they have a state waterfowl stamp, and that's usually around $15. I know in Mississippi we have one. It's $15. It's a digital stamp. They print it out on your license. It says, non-resident small game hunter, state waterfowl stamp, and that's usually the same price for resident and non-resident.
Yeah.
Then you're going to have a federal waterfowl stamp, and depending on the state, you might have a WMA permit, which is basically state-run land, and therefore they can charge people to hunt on that state-run land, and usually that's somewhere between $15 and $30. Yeah, $35, something like that. The other thing you're going to need is a hunter safety card, and usually you're going to have that number prior to getting a license. So when you order your license online, you're going to need to input that number, and you can get those from just you just type in hunter safety certification in your state, and usually there's reciprocity between states. So my hunter safety is good in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of deal. um, the next thing you need to look at is on a lot of this public land, depending if it's managed for waterfowl and if it's not managed, there's going to be day restrictions. I know in Tennessee, a lot of the areas that are managed are going to be like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday hunting only, or Saturday, and Sunday, and Thursday. There's going to be day restrictions. There's also going to be time restrictions on when you can hunt. So like up to 1 p.m. in the afternoon. And the idea behind that is they don't want people going in there and blowing out holes. Number one, for the day restrictions, and number two, they want to allow birds to come back in there and roost, and use that land as a refuge, or to feed or to rest.
Right.
And that's also fairly good practice if you have a leased hole. You want to limit the amount of times that you're going out there and shooting out that hole.
Yep.
And you want to also, find birds and kill the birds that come in the hole, and not leave a whole lot of stragglers to fly away. And if they're coming back, take ducks away from your hole if they're mixed in another group. I know a lot of people worry about that. I don't know how valid that is, but I think it's good practice nonetheless.
Yeah, I feel like it's pretty valid.
Yeah. The next thing you need to worry about is four-wheeler access, whether or not you can take a four-wheeler in there.
Mm-hmm.
If there's boat access, what kind of boats can you take in there? Can you take a boat? Is it horsepower limitations? Or are there horsepower limitations? And then if you're going to be hunting a river, the riverbank restrictions in different states, there's different rules. And don't take this as gold, what I'm about to say. I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, and I haven't researched every state, and I don't necessarily know every state. The best person to talk to about this is a DNR agent.
Yep.
Before you go, give them a phone call, a month or two out while you're planning your hunt. But generally speaking, waterways belong to the public, or the water itself belongs to the public. Now, in some states, the public can use up to the high water mark on the bank. In other states, the public can use up to the mean water mark, the average water mark on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
And then in other states, it's broken down between navigable and non-navigable rivers or streams. And say, for instance, a small creek that has water flowing through it, that might not be public land. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Mississippi, it might be public land. You can walk down that stream and, use the stream as a public waterway. In a navigable river test, basically, if it's navigable, then you can use the bank for navigable reasons, meaning you can dock a boat on the bank. You can hang out like fishing, not like fishing nets to dry, something of that nature.
All right. What does navigable purposes mean? What do you mean by that? Like, typically that means
that doesn't mean
cargo,
that you,
right?
Yeah, moving cargo, basically like shipping. I know in Louisiana, I think that's the test down here.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that you can, park on the bank, get out on the bank, and start fishing. That's not what that means. It means, are you using it for a navigable purpose? And if you are, then you're probably okay. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean either that you can build a blind on the bank either, So these are also things to be cognizant of. Yep. And then in other states, particularly out west, where cattle grazing and is really big, and there's limited water, so a limited supply of water where everybody's trying to get at water. Mm-hmm. There is the idea that the stream bed is owned by the private landowner. And that means if you draw a line down the center of the stream, there's an invisible line there where the guy on one side of the river owns that side up to that line, and the guy on the other side owns up to that line, but the water is publicly owned. So the idea behind it,
You can't dam up the water.
yeah, and you can't divert the water into your cattle watering hole,
Right.
or into your crop field. You have to allow access, or the water is not owned by you per se.
Right. So you can take a boat down the water, but you might not necessarily be able to tie your boat off to a tree, or even drop an anchor.
Or wade
Yeah.
down
Right.
down the river. So these are all things to keep in mind when you're planning your hunt.
Yeah.
And the best people to contact is the DNR agent. And if you want to hunt a particular spot, and you think that the stream bed might be an issue, it's best to call the landowner
Yep.
and say, "Hey, I would like to float down this stream in a canoe. I think that I, might have an interest in getting out of the canoe. Can I walk in the stream bed?" And obviously honor their wishes, right? Because they own that stream bed legally, and they can have you removed from it. So,
And we learned this lesson the hard way. I mean, we were hunting 2 seasons ago, and we were hunting on a lake, really. And in Mississippi, you can hunt up to the mean, right? So
yeah,
we were hunting beneath the mean watermark, and this crew of guys who pull up at I don't even know, late. The sun was already up, birds were flying. It was going to be a really great morning, and they told us we couldn't be there. They weren't even landowners. Their dad knew the guy that owned the land or something like that. Ends up, it kind of ruins the hunt, and those dudes were a bunch of clowns that didn't really know what they were doing. And come to find out, we could legally be there, and on top of that, the landowner would have been totally cool with us being there, and he said we should have told those guys to go screw off. So make the right phone calls before you jump on a piece of water if that's going to be an issue.
yeah, and also if that situation arises, I think a lot of people get very heated over this.
Yep.
And to me, this is not an issue that you should get
shot over
or overly angry, because bottom line is you're out there to enjoy yourself. And if you're angry and you're allowing this to mess up your hunt, when in reality, if we had picked up those decoys, hopped in the boat, and drove 300 yards, they wouldn't have been able to say anything.
Yeah.
And
we stayed and hunted with those guys, which we shouldn't have.
Yeah, they were, they kind of ruined the hunt. I think they were doing it on purpose. But, just stay calm. Try to enjoy yourself if something doesn't go right or as planned. And just be cordial to each other, because in general, we're all out there for the same reasons, and we all have the same end goal in sight. So, just be respectful of each other.
Yep, I agree. All right, so what do we got next?
All right, atmospheric conditions. So when I look at a piece of property, public land, in a different state, there's a few things that I'm going to be, right off the bat, I'm going to start wondering. Once I've got all the legal issues out of the way. The first thing I'm going to be worried about is water levels. And that is particularly important when you're hunting an area, out west, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, areas that don't see as much rainfall as I do in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. And during duck season, half of Arkansas is underwater. Water's not an issue.
Yeah, most
right.
Seasons.
So what you've got to worry about is, where are the water levels? and if you're hunting a river, that's also important. For instance, on the Mississippi River, right? Uh, Sometimes, if the water level is low, it's not going to be onto the banks, and you're not going to be able to find those flooded timber spots.
Mm-hmm.
All right, which means that it might not be worth hunting. And all of that is dependent on the year. Like last year, we had an incredibly wet season. I I was hunting the 30 feet. I was hunting the top 15 feet of oak trees. That's how flooded the river was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was almost over the levee in a few places. Uh, in other seasons, we go out there and there's nothing but sandbars, which means that you can be hunting on a sandbar and like some sort of pothole, and you can still do all right. But it depends. The other thing that you're going to need to worry about is what is that water level doing that day? Is it rising? Is it falling?
Right.
And that's something you need to be aware of if you're going into some of these back channels and the water level drops 2 feet. Your exit and access route may now be a bunch of rocks from a jetty that's now exposed.
Right.
Right. The other thing is one time when I first got my boat in college, or I was just out of college. I was on the Mississippi River. I anchored the boat to what I thought was a tree. The water level rose. The tree was really just a stick in the mud. The boat drifted off down a channel, across like a 30-yard channel and down 100 yards. And basically, it's 30-something degrees. I had to strap decoys to a log on either side of the log and float that log out to my boat while I was like on top of the log. And basically, got in the boat and brought it back over. But that's something that I had not thought of. Just from experience, it's one of those things you learn from experience. And another thing too, say the water drops out, now your boat is beached. Now what?
Yeah.
Right. If you're hunting with just two guys, you might not be able to get it off.
Yeah, you're staying the night.
Yeah, so that's something to be very cognizant on these big rivers. And where you can find that on is you can type in like Mississippi River gauge system, and they'll have different gauges up and down the river. So if you're hunting, say if I'm hunting North Mississippi or South Tennessee, I'm going to be looking at the Memphis River gauge.
Mm-hmm.
The National Weather Service is also something you can call in, and they'll have the readings.
Yeah. It's also, you want to know these levels from a safety standpoint. I mean, Mississippi gets pretty gnarly if the wind conditions are high and, it's at X amount of feet. We've been out there. It's pretty scary. I mean, last season, that country singer dude died out on the, I don't know where he was on a river. But, I mean, you get this big choppy water. Yeah, it's no joke when it's 30 degrees outside. Or
yeah, in particular, too, if you've got a big flow day and there's a lot of mass moving down that river from north to south, and then you've got a southerly wind.
Yeah, it's a bad combination.
Yeah, that wind may only be 5 miles an hour, but it's creating a significant amount of chop on that river.
Yep.
And that's one of those things where you get out there and, you might just have to turn around if you don't know that a 5 mile an hour wind creates dangerous conditions.
Mm-hmm.
That just comes from experience and where you're hunting. So all of these are things that you need to account for when you're choosing a place to hunt.
Yeah, especially if you've never been in a boat on a big river before.
Yeah, it's scary. It can be scary.
Yeah.
The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to contact the DNR guys, and I'm going to figure out if I find a spot, like the spot that I'm going to show you here on the next few slides, is the water level, is there water there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if there is water there, have they seen birds? Are birds using it? What is the water going to do in the next week? All of
Right.
those things are going to factor into my decision of where I'm going to hunt and whether or not it's worth me driving out there in the first place.
Right.
Um, and then you can also call a biologist. Those guys know a lot. We'll talk about that a little later. The next thing I'm looking at is the highs and the lows, the average highs, the average lows of when or of where I'm going to be hunting. In particular, if I'm going to go further north, say like north of Tennessee, this is going to be of particular interest to me because if I get out there and it is 15 degrees, I know that everything's going to be locked up.
Mm-hmm.
And my only choice at that point is hunting a river. Or it might not even be worth me going up. It might just be worth me sitting my happy butt down in Mississippi,
Right.
and waiting on the ducks to get down here.
Right.
The next thing I'm going to be worried about is snowfall. In particular, is there snow on the ground? And if there is, how much snow is on the ground? And is it freezing conditions? Because the main thing, the two factors that make waterfowl move is frozen water and a significant amount of snowfall. Now, you would think that would be that those two things would are givens.
Right.
Well, it's not, because last season we had some cold temperatures up north, but very little snow on the ground. And that means that ducks are still able to get into the fields in North and South Dakota, in particular, in Manitoba, and feed in the fields because that ground has not yet been covered with snow. And then they can go to a river and just, a piece of, or a big lake and loaf on the lake.
Right.
So that's something I'm going to pay attention to too, as well. If I'm looking at Nebraska and I call the DNR agent or the biologist and he tells me that there's 7 feet of snow on the fields, I'm not going that far north.
No.
So, all of these things are things to take into consideration.
And what this means to me too is that if you're doing a destination hunt and you're not going with a guide, and not that there's anything wrong with going with guides, we don't hunt with guides pretty much because we can't afford to hunt with guides. Is be flexible on where you're going to go hunt. You don't have to buy your license. So, sorry, we're back. Just had to make another little edit. The video went out. But stay flexible. If you do some preseason scouting via the methods that we're about to show you, have a couple places, a few hours drive away. That way, if you do get snowed out in spot A, you have spot B to move on to. And so we'll talk about that going forward. All right, so what's the next topic? We're moving on to the next slide now, right?
Yeah. So this slide is actually the most important slide, I think, on the entire PowerPoint presentation. And basically, this is going to show you how I choose a spot to hunt and where I'm going to be naturally drawn to that's going to give me the best chance of seeing ducks. Now, I'm not telling you that this is going to get you a limit. I'm not telling you that you're even going to kill birds. But if you follow this, generally speaking, you will at least see birds and be in an area where birds are likely to be.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so the first thing I'm looking at is the migratory flyways across the United States. And there's 4 of them. There's the Atlantic Flyway, the Mississippi Flyway, the Central Flyway, and the Pacific Flyway. Usually what I hunt and what I've done the majority of my hunting on are the Central and the Mississippi Flyway. I've hunted on the Atlantic Flyway. I have nothing against it. Uh, my expertise, however, are not. If I went over there, I probably wouldn't kill a thing for the first week.
Right.
On here, birdnature.com, and it's got a lot of good maps of the flyways and routes that birds take. It's a good resource. Just go on there, mess around for a little bit, and you'll get the general idea of how birds move from north to south across the United States. The second thing I'm going to look for is habitat suitability. And the first thing in there is obviously water. Is there going to be water during duck season? Because a lot of water is seasonal. Where we hunt in Mississippi, during the summer, right now in the month of July, there's going to be water in lakes. And as we move into winter, the Corps of Engineers are going to drain the water out of those lakes, and you're going to have a lake bed. Additionally, the agricultural fields right now are going to be planted, and there's not going to be an ounce of water on those fields.
Mm-hmm.
So you really got to figure out what the water situation is where you're looking to go. And some places like Texas, for instance, they can have a very good duck season if there's a sufficient amount of water.
Right.
If there's not water there, then their duck season might be terrible. They might not have birds that season. The next thing I'm looking at is food sources, and primarily I'm going to be looking at agriculture fields, whether there are agricultural fields, number one, and number two, are those fields going to be flooded or are they going to be dry fields?
That typically is going to depend on the type of fields you got going around there, right? Like if they're grazing fields, they're not going to be flooded. If they're rice or corn or something like that, they might be.
Yeah, usually speaking, or generally speaking, I guess, like no one's going to flood their cow pasture, right? Additionally, you could get in a place like Kansas. I know that a lot of people do dry field hunting in Kansas, and they just don't flood the fields. And, they could be hunting over a peanut field.
Right.
Or like a newly harvested soybean field, and it's going to be perfectly dry. Mm-hmm. And there's just not a lot of water out there. And so, they adapt their hunting around that. And a lot of people over there do not hunt water holes because they think that water holes are for roosting. And if you shoot out a water hole, then the ducks are going to move on. And, there might be some validity to that,
Right.
It's still called waterfowl. So there's something about hunting over water that makes it appealing to me. But, I understand their argument there.
Yeah, it looks sweet. I mean, getting those huge groups sitting in a layout blind, nice and dry, seems pretty nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be pretty nice.
Yeah.
I don't know. Not my cup of tea. But the next thing I'm looking for is cover. And primarily I'm looking for cover on flooded fields and flooded areas. And what I'm looking for is buckbrush, some sort of natural grass is the land around it in a CRP program. Are the birds going to be using that particular area as a roosting or resting area?
What is CRP, real quick?
Oh, man.
Crop restoration program. But basically, it's when farmers put their land into a government program that it doesn't get touched. It kind of goes back to its natural state, or they plant some things there that is going to allow that land to kind of take it out of the agricultural production and CRP's typically good cover for ducks and habitat. Um,
And usually along with, in Mississippi, along with uh, planting those those native grasses and native cover for animals, they will help restore the land back to its natural wetlands uh, formation. Meaning, a lot of people in Mississippi and in Arkansas have basically leveled fields
mm-hmm.
and taken away natural wetlands in an effort to dry it out for crops. And so they will help restore wetlands.
Right.
So the
Okay.
the next thing I'm looking at is whether or not the property is managed for waterfowl. And on a lot of public property, it's not managed, meaning that they're not planting crops, they're not planting corn. In other areas, they will do that, and they usually allow hunting there.
Mm-hmm.
So, but with that are usually your special restrictions on day limitations and time limitations for hunting.
Right.
Additionally, in those areas, in a lot of states, they will have a uh, blind draw sometime in June or August. I forget which month it is, and it depends.
Mm-hmm.
They will have a blind draw, and usually you draw a blind. You're allowed to hunt that blind for the remainder of the season. You're responsible for brushing the blind and all of that. Uh, However, if you do not hunt the blind, then it's up for grabs in most cases by shooting light. Say if the blind's not occupied by shooting light, individuals that did not draw that blind can go out there and hunt.
Yep.
So it's something to keep in mind. Um, and that's all stuff you can get out of the state regulations. They'll have regulations on different public lands, and that's usually in the PDF regulations PDF that I told you about on the previous slide or two slides ago.
Cool. All right, let's move to point number 3, which is probably the most important point on the slide or in the whole presentation.
Yeah. So when I find an area within a migratory flyway, and I find an area with suitable water and habitat that I think I might want to hunt, the next thing is narrowing down where on that piece of property, that public land that I want to hunt, where are the birds going to be, and where do I have the best chance at seeing them?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, one of the potholes we hunted when we first started had everything in 1 and 2. However, it was not on a micro flyway, and we would go hours or days without seeing ducks.
Yep. So let's define a micro flyway.
A micro flyway is a terrain feature that ducks will use as a highway in a certain area. Like, for instance, people say that a duck or a group of ducks will fly over the same tree line or individual tree, every year
Mm-hmm.
in a given area. And for the most part, that generally rings true. I know where we lease land, there is a micro flyway to the east of us, and we will see thousands of ducks every day flying down that tree line.
Mm-hmm.
And they have used it for the past 6 years that we've leased that land. And, I don't know exactly what it is. I think in between, they use that tree line to get in between point A and point B, and point A and point B are both, one's a CRP field that I know is a CRP field.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is a 200-acre flooded rice field that is unharvested and unhunted.
Right.
And thousands of ducks use that tree line to fly between point A and point B.
Yep.
So the micro flyways that I think are the most important and easily identifiable from satellite imagery are rivers, lakes, wildlife refuges, and flooded and non-flooded agricultural fields.
Mm-hmm.
And the goal here is to have all of these combined into one spot that you're going to hunt. So, for instance, ducks will fly down a river. Now, they're not landing in the river. They're not using the river for any other purpose other than a navigational tool.
Mm-hmm.
They will fly down the river, and the goal is to get off the river on the right exit. So you post up off the river and hope that it's the right exit, and they come in and land in that hole that you're posted up on.
Right.
The other thing that's really important is the combination of a river and a lake. For instance, when our hole in Mississippi becomes frozen, we usually look for moving water that is not frozen. And the best place to hunt is where a river meets a lake bottom. And you can have a 100 by 100 yard hole there. You could have a 20 by 10 yard hole there. It does not matter as long as that piece of water is open and not iced over. The best day of hunting I've had in my life was where a river meets a lake bottom. And it was over probably a 30 by 20 yard hole. So, and ducks were just using that as a navigational tool that day and dumping into our hole. Like, one volley would be done, and we couldn't reload fast enough before another group of 200 were coming in.
Yep. That was a good day. I wasn't there for that, unfortunately.
No, I don't think you were.
I was in an office wanting to blow my brains out as I got the text messages.
The next thing I'm looking at is a wildlife refuge. Is there a wildlife refuge? And is that refuge being managed for waterfowl? So a wildlife refuge is a designated piece of land that is managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And basically, in most wildlife refuges, there are some exceptions for youth hunts and disability hunts, and maybe some other ones. But for the most part, you are not able to fish or hunt in those refuges. Now, the best thing to look at is to go to the fishandwildlifeservice.gov/refuges. And I've got that on the PowerPoint. You just click on it. And that'll take you, and you can find locations, waterfowl reports, productivity reports, whether or not they have water, whether or not the crops are there, all the stuff that you need to know that ducks are going to be in that area. 100%. You can talk to a biologist there, and he'll tell you, yeah, we haven't seen ducks this season. Usually they show up around January 1st.
Right.
Another thing that that link will tell you is what subspecies of ducks are going to be in your region. And this is going to help you out particularly with decoy selection, what decoys to bring. If they have a lot of mallards, then you're going to bring mallards. If they got a lot of widgeon, you might want to throw some widgeon decoys in there. And then additionally, what kind of calls you're going to have on your lanyard.
Yep.
As far as gadwall, teal, and widgeon calls. The next thing is flooded and non-flooded agricultural fields. Generally speaking, you're going to want to see some sort of production in an agricultural field, meaning that you don't want it to be a cattle grazing field next to where you're hunting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that you can't kill ducks near those fields. I'm sure you can. But you're going to want to find something that's going to have the food source that these waterfowl need. And that's either a flooded field or a non-flooded field.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal of this whole slide is to show you river, lakes, wildlife refuges, and then your agricultural fields. And for you to figure out where on the map all of those meet, and you hunt right under them, right where they meet.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right, so that's the most important part of this presentation. Let's see what the next slide. All right, so this slide is just a migration map. It was pulled off the website from the first link, and this is the flyways across the U.S. You know, take it for what it's worth. I don't know how accurate it is, but it's pretty cool. It's got a lot of colors and dotted lines and such.
It looks sweet.
Yeah, it is pretty cool. I wonder if the people at Nature Bird are, when they put this whole thing together, are they put it together for the purpose of me putting it on this YouTube channel to teach people how to kill ducks.
I'm guessing probably not.
I appreciate your hard work, though.
Yeah, but it's all our money that goes into the conservation, so they have us to appreciate for that anyways.
Yeah. Donate some money to Ducks Unlimited or Delta Waterfowl.
Yep. Do your job.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So basically what I did here is I took a piece of public land, just a random piece of land. I have not hunted this land. I chose it for a few reasons. One, it is really non-dimensional. So there are scattered pieces of public between private land. So you've got to really think about your access points. You also have the idea that some of this land is completely shut off from access, which means that the only way you're going to access some of this is through the river that flows through this.
Mm-hmm.
Additionally, I chose it because of the different types of ways that you can access this land, and you know, it's just a really interesting piece of public property.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the United States. Now, if you do happen to find this property, I'm not saying there's going to be birds there. I've never hunted it. I don't even know if it's on a flyway. I mean, it's, you know, it could be. But generally speaking, I redacted all the names off of this because I don't want our 52 listeners to show up to this piece of property on opening day
and blow out some dude's honey hole.
Yeah, and he's going to have us to thank for it. So, you know, it's probably not worth your time to go up and look at it. But it is weird, and it, you know, I haven't seen a lot of public land like this, so I chose.
It's a great example. We should preface that Caleb and I like to hunt spots that are harder to get to. That means we like to hunt spots where there's not four-wheeler access. We like to hunt spots that there's not a close road to. It's going to get you further away from the crowd. And we like to be further away from the crowd. You're typically going to have a higher success rate if you don't have a guy hunting, 400 yards away from you to your left and shooting your swinging birds and all that stuff.
Well, not even 400 yards. Like try 75.
Yeah,
I've been in public land where it's, I mean, you get there an hour before shooting light, and some dude rolls up and throws his decoys out 75 yards from you. If you're that guy, you should reconsider your practices because it's not a very nice thing to do right at shooting light.
Yeah.
However, with that being said, if you don't like those type of people, then try and find places that are harder to access.
Yep.
People are lazy. They're not going to go where if you're willing to go there, you can automatically, if people can't drive a four-wheeler, you can take out 50% of the population.
At least.
So
at least.
This is all something to think about.
Yep.
If I was going to hunt this property, this piece of land, you see my cursor?
Yep.
I know, because I've done research on this, that this river flows from west to east along this line. I would put a canoe in right here. I don't think this river is big enough for a boat other than like a Go Devil or a surface drive motor, which I do not have. And I would float and I would try and access different pieces of this property through the river. It's an idea.
Yep.
And I know, having done research, that you can camp out here. There are no designated camping areas, but you can. And that is something I would consider.
Uh-huh.
All right. So basically, too, another thing that you want to look at when you're choosing a piece of public land is I like to start big. And sometimes big is like the entire state. See where that piece of land falls within the state. If you're within, 100 miles of a place like Houston or Atlanta, everybody and their mother is going to be on this public land trying to hunt.
Yep.
If you're in some place like Montana, outside of out way far away from a big city, not that there are big cities in Montana, then you might not see anyone else out there hunting. In which case, you're going to have free reign over the property, and you're going to, be able to scout birds, say, oh, look where those birds are going. Oh, I can move there, et cetera, et cetera. Something to keep in mind.
Yep. Absolutely.
All right, next slide. So basically here what I did is I got on Google Maps, and I took a screenshot of Google Maps from pretty far away. It's basically what you just saw in the previous image, but it's a satellite imagery. This is going to tell me a number of things about this piece of land. First off, I'm going to notice down at the bottom of the screen that it says 2016. So I know that it is the month of July. So I know that this cannot have been taken in the fall or the winter. Because there's green leaves on the trees, I know that this photo was taken sometime during the spring or the summer. All right. So likely, since it's July, it was probably taken like in the spring sometime.
Mm-hmm.
All right. As you zoom in, you are going to see different images on Google Maps. All right. And as we will see later on in the slide, those images are taken at different times of the year. That is something to keep in mind. And it's, if something was taken in the winter versus the summer, you're going to see generally what the water level looks like, whether or not areas flood, what the bottoms of this particular river looks like. Additionally, this says Digital Globe Landsat Texas. Unfortunately for you guys, if you're trying to figure out where this is not in Texas. I guess this is the company that took this picture, but it's not in Texas. So keep that in mind if you're trying to figure out where this is, which is a giant waste of time.
All right.
All right. Shall we move on?
Yep.
All right. So what I did here is I took the first image, which I got off of the state DNR website, and I overlaid it with the satellite imagery to generally show me where the boundaries are for this public and private land. So because this is a very tricky piece of land, this is particularly helpful. And I would not go out on a hunt without something like this. Because the last thing you want to do is wander out of the public land onto private property and then have DNR or the police called on you because you're basically being irresponsible at that point.
Right.
So I would have something, and if that does happen, which it has happened to me multiple times, like I know just recently I was rabbit hunting. I was given a piece of property. I'm very good with directions and a map. And I just got turned around. And I ended up way outside of the land that I was allowed to be hunting on. And, I went to the landowner. I said, hey, this happened. Once I figured out where I was, I kind of ratted on myself, so if he basically said, hey, if you hear anything about this, this is what happened. It wasn't on purpose, yada, yada, yada. Just be as respectful as possible.
Right.
Um, so this is a very useful tool to show you where the parking is on the satellite imagery and where the boundaries are, generally speaking, where they are. It's not going to be 100%. It's really hard to get everything lined up, but you're going to be able to kind of get an idea of what this looks like. All right, the access slide. All right, so the first thing I'm looking at on this hybrid piece of property is where the access points are. Like I told you earlier, I would put in a canoe here if I was going to do this, and I would float this stream and kind of scout the first day I got there. But as I said, I'm going to look at water flow information. Is it from west to east, north to south, et cetera, et cetera? I'm going to look at whether or not I can bring a canoe in there. I'm going to try and zoom in. If it looks like I can't get a boat through there, which on this stream I don't think I can, I'm going to look at the river flow and see whether or not I can paddle both ways on that stream. And because I'm seeing a lot of hills and contours on this map with little creeks and kind of valleys, I'm going to assume that the current on this particular stream is going to be too strong to paddle out and paddle back to my truck.
That sucks if you get washed way downstream.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you have to go back to your truck, likely you're going to be walking that canoe back on the bank.
Yep.
Which means that if this is a place where the landowner owns the stream bed, you're going to be breaking the law.
Right.
So I would keep that in mind as well. And like we already went through on the river access, that's obviously something to keep in mind. The next thing I'm going to be looking at is whether or not four-wheelers are allowed, and whether or not if they aren't allowed, if that's the truth of the matter on the piece of property. And as you zoom in, you will likely be able to see four-wheeler tracks.
Yep.
And that's something you need to keep in mind. Whether or not you're going to bring a four-wheeler, if you have one, it's something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And if you aren't allowed to drive a four-wheeler on a trail, then you shouldn't be driving a four-wheeler on a trail. And you should be respectful of that, because the majority of people that are going to go hunt out there are going to abide by those rules. And so it's just pretty disrespectful to the entire community and to the piece of property, because there's a reason why they don't want you doing that. Mm-hmm. If you break those laws. Not to mention there's some whistleblower things going on right now to where if somebody sees your license plate, they can call it into an organization, and that organization will report you to DNR.
Yeah, and they'll get a reward for doing it.
Yeah. So I would be hesitant to break those laws.
Yeah, it's a good way to lose a four-wheeler.
Yeah. If you are allowed to drive on the trails, then the questions you need to ask are the trails maintained? Are they flooded? And if they aren't maintained, will there be a lot of down trees on the trail? Because four-wheelers don't go over giant oaks very well that are 3 feet off the ground.
Yeah. And it could just slow you down when you could just be walking out there.
Yep. If you're going to be walking, the questions to ask are, what do the trails look like from parking access? How worn are the trails? Meaning, is there actually a trail where the map says there is a trail? And then, are the trails going to be rutted out? Because if you're walking in a flooded area that has had 6 four-wheelers drive down it every day for the past month and a half of duck season, and you have to walk a mile and a half in, it's going to make for a very, very rough mile and a half walking on the rutted out trail.
Yeah, it sucks. You got to find that middle spot right in between where the tires go, but it kind of, slopes off and then you start slipping into the ruts.
Yeah,
It's a pain in the ass.
it's miserable to say the least. The next thing you need to question, and one of the reasons why I chose this piece of property is because of the idea of corner hopping. And you can see my cursor, right?
Yep.
Corner hopping. Oh man, it went away. All right, corner hopping is where you're on another piece of public land. You basically have to hop over a piece of private property. So you're stepping over a piece of private property.
Which could be illegal, depending
Which
on the state.
Yeah, which could be illegal. If that's going to be an issue, you should call the landowner and say, "Hey, I want to travel from point A to point B. There's a possibility of me stepping over your land for
The briefest of a tenth of a second, yeah.
yeah, and just be respectful and as cordial as possible." Who knows? He may respect the call and be like, "Hey, I just harvested a field. I left a whole bunch of peanuts on the ground or corn. The ducks are in it right now. You're welcome to hunt it."
Right.
I mean,
Not that you should hunt a baited field.
well,
But
it's not, if he just harvested it, it's not illegal.
Right.
I mean, if, you can't go down and just chop down a bunch of corn and leave it on the ground. But, if he's rolling a combine through there
Yeah.
and he's harvesting that field, then
You're good to go.
yeah, generally, yep. All right, so those are those are my main points on access. Do you see anything else, Josh?
No, I think we're good on that.
All right. So the next thing that you're going to want to look at is spot selection on the map. And I'll go back for a second so I can show you where this is on the bigger picture of things. All right. So where I just zoomed into is this piece of ground right here. And the reason why I chose this piece of ground is because of the micro flyways that we were talking about in one of the previous slides. All right, so this is just a satellite imagery of that zoomed in area that I just showed you. And why I like this spot is for a few reasons. Well, first off, dang it, dude. All right, first off, this is all bottomland down here. It is a low piece of land that is likely to have water. Additionally, I have a runoff creek right here, which birds might be using as a microflyway, which intersects this other terrain feature, this stream, the main stream that we're talking about, that we saw on the other maps. And that's another flyway, possibly. Additionally, you have this Oxbow Lake right here, which looks like a permanent water source, to where I'm probably going to find water if I don't find it up in here. All right, we can go to the next slide because I think it zooms in a little further.
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So this is the stream that's coming in from the north, and this is another hybrid image that gives me the boundaries of where I can walk and where I can hunt. It seems that there's access from here, but it's another corner hopping situation, which might mean that four-wheelers can't get in there. All right. Additionally, another reason why I like this piece is because down here, there's a possibility of this area right here flooding. And four-wheelers aren't going across this river. So that means that you might be able to wade across if you can find a shallow enough spot, or you can, if you're doing the canoe thing, you can get on the other side and whatever's in here is likely untouched. I think the next slide is probably better. Okay, same piece of property. I've got this Oxbow Lake, like I said. I've got what looks to be like water up in here. This is probably flooded. This looks like it floods from here up into here. So I know I'm going to have water. I also know that I have the intersection of this creek and this stream right here. So I know that I'm on permanent water via the Oxbow.
Mm-hmm.
Likelihood of flooding in this bottomland. I've got a micro flyway with the major stream, a possible micro flyway with the small creek coming in from the north. And I know, because I did my research, that if I were to go on the ground right here, I would be within a half a mile to a mile and a half of a refuge. Additionally, I went onto that website and I checked if they manage for waterfowl, and they do. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that just because a refuge manages for waterfowl does not mean that there's an abundant amount of waterfowl in that refuge, or it's used a whole lot. They may just be managing it for local wood ducks in the region.
Right.
For instance, Georgia has a number of different refuges that are managed for waterfowl. And I am not packing up the truck to drive to Georgia to hunt next to that refuge.
North Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah, because I know it's not on a flyway. Right? So what you need to look at is the refuge reports, and you need to contact the wildlife biologist that's in charge of that refuge and figure out when the ducks use it, what the water level is looking like this season, and whether or not there's any ducks in the area before you go out there. And it could be that December 12th rolls around, I want to head to this spot. I call the biologist up and he says, I haven't seen a duck all season. There's not a sufficient amount of water out here. They moved on. If they came through here, they moved on rather quickly. And I need to be looking for another spot, possibly in a different state.
Yep.
So a little bit of research before you get boots on the ground goes a long way. Now, with this being said, on this particular WMA, if I were going to go out here and say I was going to spend 3 days on this WMA, I would have multiple spots laid out just like I laid it out for you in this presentation of possible places I can hunt.
Yeah.
And the reason being is, what if I get here and it's already taken? What if I get here and I see birds landing a mile away? Right. Well, I need to know if where they're landing is on public property. And if it is, then there's a likelihood that I can hunt it and go over there. Am I missing anything on this slide?
No, I think we're looking pretty good. Yeah, just looking at those low-lying areas in the center of the slide, you kind of see what looks like it's pretty swamped out, like a little bit left of your cursor. To me, that looks like there's going to be a lot of water in that area.
Yeah. Additionally, too, you can see a lot of like habitat, like good habitat qualities to this area. You see a lot of buckbrush in there.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed that as we zoomed in, this photo was taken during the winter.
Yep.
All right, the leaves are off the trees, so this might be a decent example of what the water levels might look like during duck season.
Mm-hmm. And we know that it's hardwoods because there's no leaves.
Exactly. So in this particular area, you do a little research on the plant, what kind of trees are out there. You're going to find that this particular spot has a lot of oak trees, which have acorns, and ducks eat acorns, especially when it's cold.
Yep.
So you know there's a food source, you know there's cover. I would bet that if I went to this spot and it was on a flyway, which I'm not saying that it is, I would have a significant chance of at least seeing ducks. And from there, I can hone my scouting to find a spot on this piece of public property where ducks are landing.
Right.
And that's where you want to be. One thing that you need to really think about too is you do all this research on these spots. I spent a good amount of time putting this together, and I don't do this for every piece of public land I go to. I do it all in my head, and it's all there, but I don't lay it out on a PowerPoint presentation.
Right.
You know, I might take notes on it so that when it comes around to buying licenses and the law, like I can remember, okay, well, this state, this is in Mississippi. It's the mean water mark on the banks. I need this, 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 and this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
You
do it enough times. I mean, we can kind of look, at maps and it all falls, together for us, and we see where we think would be good spots. But this is a great way. If I'm a new waterfowler, this is exactly how I would start thinking about things, and I'd probably lay it out in a very similar way.
Yeah. Additionally, too, when you look at your WMA and you decide where you're going to hunt, I would choose a spot that allows small game hunting for rabbits and squirrels. I would choose a spot that allows upland bird hunting.
Yeah, if possible.
If possible. Like in Mississippi, our quail population is shot, so you're not going to find quail. But, in North Dakota, we hunted and we would limit out and we'd go pheasant hunting.
Yep.
So if it does happen to where you get out to wherever you're going and the ducks aren't there, you at least have a backup plan and you didn't drive to a new state.
Right.
Not to do any hunting.
Right.
And also I would come prepared for that as well. I would make sure that I have the proper gauge to shoot a pheasant with the proper ammo.
Mm-hmm.
And probably my Hunter Orange. I'd probably bring that as well, because a lot of these spots do allow deer hunting. Yep. So if you're trumping through the woods, you don't want to be running around in camo. Just general safety measures. Mm-hmm. I think that pretty much covers it, man.
Yeah. That's great. So, I mean, you're looking at it, and I think that's a great place to get these guys started. Sorry, guys, we're clearly tired, but I think that's a fantastic place for them to get started. And if you guys have questions, certainly write in. I forgot to include this at the beginning of the podcast, but this PowerPoint is going to be on the website, which is theaveragewaterfowlers.com. So you'll be able to download that PowerPoint and go back through it. And I think that should help you guys out. Go ahead and shoot us an email at theaveragewaterfowler@gmail.com. And if you have questions, we'll be happy to answer them. We'll get back to you as soon as possible. I don't expect to have the inbox overrun with the 45 people that listen to this podcast, but
most of them being friends and family members.
Yeah, exactly. But if we can do anything to help you guys out, that's what we're here for. And this is just the way that we look at it. I would love, if there's some experienced guys listening to this, I would love to hear how you guys think about these things, and just get some thoughts going on so everybody can step up their game. That'd be awesome to get that kind of feedback too. So, I'm fired up for duck season. I can't wait. Teal season's not far away. We don't really have any teal hunts planned, as our land is not. It's going to be bone dry by the end. But we should probably look at hunting some public land.
Well, here's what I'll say about public land, and I hunt a lot of it, and I always have friends that hunt their lease or their land that they own. And they'll always say to me, what when I go hunting, it's either on or it's off.
Yep.
And here's the reality of the situation is that it's like that everywhere,
Yep.
right? The ducks are going to be there, and then the next day they could be gone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the worst thing you can do during your 60-day season is to realize that you're not killing ducks, to see no major change in weather, and to stay in the same spot.
Yep.
If you're not killing anything, then you need to move. If
Yep.
the ducks are not in the region, which you should be able to tell by the refuge reports, then you should go where the refuge reports are high.
Yep. And I think, man, so I think that goes day by day. Like if you're sitting in your field, and we make this mistake, you get comfortable sitting in your nice little warm blind and everything's happy and your decoys are there and you don't have to do anything. It's really nice. And you're not shooting anything, and you didn't shoot anything the day before, but you're seeing all these birds fly around, man, it's time to move. And, if it's off on the fields, it's typically off for all the fields, but there's ducks in your area, you can kill them on public land. And personally, public land's my favorite thing to hunt. I like the adventure of it, getting out, hunting new places, and hiking in. It's just hard work, which makes it more rewarding. But, I'm a big believer in if something's not happening, change your situation. If you were in town the morning before and everybody that was hunting fields didn't shoot anything, and you're not shooting anything in the fields the next morning, get out of the fields. That's my thought.
Yeah, and a lot of this goes to knowing the area you're hunting and saying to yourself, okay, and part of this comes from experience over years. I'm not seeing birds.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not seeing them here, I need to go here. And if I go there and I don't see birds, then I know that the birds aren't there.
All right.
And if I check the refuge reports that says, usually there are 200,000 mallards in a refuge and it's down to 10,000,
yeah, it's time to boogie out.
It's time to go north.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So.
Or south, potentially. If you're
south.
Up north, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think those are all things to keep in mind. We make that mistake a lot, and I'm ready to stop making that mistake.
But you only have 60 days.
Yeah.
And you make your success where during those 60 days, and a lot of people don't move.
Yeah. And not all of us can hunt all 60 days, Sometimes you're lucky if you can hunt, a few weekends out of the season. Or if you're like us or me, if I have a job, I hunt pretty much every weekend, and then I'll take some vacation time and hunt. So you're only hunting 30, 40 days out of the season. Caleb hunts 50, but, you got limited time. You got to make decisions. You got to act, in my opinion.
And I would act on those refuge reports. Yeah. Those are probably going to be the most accurate. Call your biologist and see what they're saying. A lot of times, in Mississippi, they'll fly over the Delta with an airplane once a week.
Yep.
And they'll get numbers.
Yep.
And they'll post those numbers on the refuge websites or the DNR website. Yeah. So look at those reports, be looking for them during the week, and make your move accordingly.
Here's a question for you. So Ducks Unlimited has their migration map, and obviously we're Ducks Unlimited supporters, and we believe in supporting Ducks Unlimited. But what do you feel about that migration map and all the dudes that are leaving comments on there?
Okay, so first off, in the realm of duck hunting, when it comes to spots that are on and off, I wouldn't trust anyone to give you the truth. besides a refuge report. And the reason being is because when you look at those comments on the migration map, you don't know if it's a guide saying that he's got ducks in the area or if it's a guy hunting a $60,000 a year lodge saying he's got ducks. And some of those guys have thousands upon thousands of acres, and they basically have their own refuge system with 17 holes and one big hole that's just full to the brim of rice. Right. So you don't know. You also have guys on there that will say there's no ducks in the area. It's not worth the drive out there.
Yeah.
And there could be ducks in the area. Yeah. And like you'll usually see like didn't see a single duck. And then
somebody in the comments will be like, "Are you out of your mind?"
Yeah, like 5 miles down the road, the guy's like, "I killed limits," and I've been hunting public land, and you're like, something funny is going on here. So no, I don't trust it. I usually don't look at it. Not to mention, it's just a hard page to use.
Yeah.
Nothing about it is smooth and fast. So like when you're clicking on things,
the UI sucks.
Yeah, it just I don't like that web page. I don't trust anyone on there, and I don't get my information from waterfowl forums either because I don't. It's on waterfowl forums, especially gear forums. For the most part, it's like people out there trying to justify the $600 they spent on something.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, this is the best piece of equipment ever. Like you spent $600 on a pair of underwear. Yeah.
I mean, I get sucked into that migration map because I'll be in the office and I'm like, oh man, it's like Wednesday and you're like just fired up to head out Friday. And you're like, oh man, it looks like they're killing them. I wonder if the temperature stays the same. We might kill them too. I get sucked into it.
What I do pay attention to more than anything is the weather report.
Yeah.
And it's not the weather report of where I'm at. It's the weather report of what's north of me.
Yep.
What's the weather in St. Louis if I'm hunting in Mississippi? What's the weather in Nebraska? Is there a front coming from north to south? Is it dumping snow? Number one. If it's dumping snow, what is the direction? And what I like to see, and this is going to make a bunch of Central Flyway guys mad, I like to see a front coming from the north to the north. It's coming from like northwest to northeast because what it's doing is it's pushing birds seemingly south and across Arkansas towards me.
Yep.
But I'll take any cold front that's moving through from north to south.
I will too.
And I will also pay attention to fronts coming from the south to north because I feel like
just because they're down there doesn't mean they won't come back up.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like when we hunt and a front pushes from the south, we might get birds from Louisiana into Mississippi. Usually some gadwall and some teals if it's a warmer front. And then once that front moves in, you got like a day and a half, and they could be back up in Tennessee, Missouri, within a day and a half, easily. So, I kind of fear a southern front for that reason because I know that it could change. It could push birds back north.
Yep.
And that's kind of counterproductive to where I sit.
Yeah. And that was kind of last season, right? Like we had that really weird weather pattern where it was warm up north and cold down south. El Nino.
Yeah, that's what everybody says.
Yeah.
What's this dang El Nino moving through? I'm like, Nick, it's an El Nino year.
Yeah.
Or what is it? El Nino and what is it?
El Nino.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't pay attention to it. It's a bunch of wise tales. Comes around every 5 years. That's all I know.
Well, yeah, man, I think that'll get some people on the right track and hopefully, guys, if you found this podcast helpful, subscribe to the YouTube channel, give us a like. You can follow us on Instagram at the average waterfowlers is our handle, and hopefully we'll be kind of pushing out some good content on Instagram and continue it. We'll have another podcast out for you guys next week, which will be much more exciting and less slow. But I think this is valuable. I don't know anywhere else on the internet, anywhere period, that you can get this kind of information broken down for you like that. We certainly didn't have it. I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of guys.
Yeah, and also too, I adopted this from planning military deals, like with the maps and everything. Uh, and this type of scouting can be incredibly helpful if you're a big game hunter as well.
Yep.
And I was talking to a guy who big game hunts today, and he also is a huge skier from Wyoming. And he uses Google Earth, and you can actually draw a trail on there, and it'll give you like elevation changes on that trail.
Mm-hmm.
And you can layer, like I did on Google. You can layer different images over each other.
Yep.
Super helpful. Super helpful. If you're not just doing waterfowl as well, it kind of gives you really a play-by-play of what you're looking at on the ground to analyze terrain in that manner.
Yeah, and I don't know if we mentioned it in the podcast. I remember talking about in the run through, but Onyx Maps, it's like $100 per state. It's a cloud solution. You can download it to a chip for your GPS. You can have it on your phone, and it has all those layering tools. It's, the people that I know that run it love it. They say it's just like one of the best things out there. It shows private property lines on your GPS, so you can know 100% if you're on private property or not. I would recommend looking into that. I know that we'll be running that. I'm running it for a couple big game hunts, and hopefully running it. I'm going to buy the Mississippi one as well.
Does that give you contact information for private landowners?
I think it does. I think I remember hearing that it does do that. There's a podcast that Randy Newberg did with them. Randy Newberg's a super famous big game hunter, conservationist, and overall badass. And he did a podcast with them, and I think that they said that they do that, but I can't remember. So I would look into that as well. Yeah. Other than that, everybody get ready. Start doing this stuff now. I mean, Caleb, you're doing that now for our or your destination hunt, which I wasn't planning on doing, but it's kind of looking like it's shaping out to where I might be able to do it. So I might tag along after you did all this hard work, and I'll just shoot ducks.
Yeah.
But I think now's the time to start doing it and start calling biologists. Make sure that you're building relationships with biologists in the parts of the states that you want to hunt, and that's going to be a lifeline for you as it gets closer to season. Make friends with those guys. They're there to help you out, and they're just a great resource. I've been working with some biologists in Colorado for an elk hunt that I'm planning on trying to get done this season. So it's been a good experience for me. I've learned a lot doing that.
Another like untapped resource, and we covered it in the podcast, is DNR, the game wardens, and those game wardens are assigned to specific areas of the state, so they really know what's going on in those WMAs.
Yep.
A huge benefit to contact them. One, to make sure you're legal in what you're doing, and two, they're going to give you advice, having been on the ground, the best way to get into certain areas.
Yep.
And granted, some of them are not as cool as others.
Yep.
But their job is to enforce the law and to help you out.
Yep.
I mean, that's what they're there for. And I know a lot of waterfowlers that just won't even. They just hate game wardens.
Everybody's scared of them.
Everybody's scared of them. Well, guess what? Those guys know a lot more about where you're going than you do.
Yeah.
So it's worth trying to build that relationship if you can make it happen.
Yeah. And then when you do see them out there, they know who you are. They trust you. They're not going to hassle you too much, you know?
Yeah. And you know you're legal because you already talked to them and you got the stuff you need.
Yep.
Which I've been caught in a situation where, I got in trouble with the game warden based solely on the fact that I was hunting in Mississippi and my federal duck stamp was on my Arkansas license. And I left the Arkansas license at home because
Yeah.
I was in Mississippi. You put it on the back of your license, you don't think twice about it.
Right.
And, it's definitely one of those things where if you know him and you know him well enough, and you're cordial with him, that guy basically, I mailed in a federal duck stamp to the courthouse, and that was the end of that. I mean, I didn't get charged or anything with a violation, so it's just one of those things. If you're courteous to them, they're going to help you out in any way they can. They're not out there to catch the guy that makes the mistake. They're out there to catch the guy that shoots over like 5 times over his limit. That's what they're there for. Yeah. So
don't shoot over your limit. If you're a new
Yeah.
guy, you're a young guy. Don't do that. There's an old reason.
Guy.
Yeah, or an old guy. There's a reason those limits are in place. And the biologist, regardless of what everybody in your hunting crew say, they don't make that that limit there to just piss you off, or the season dates to piss you off. Oh man, they're screwing us on these season dates. I used to think that. Why won't they give us later season dates?
I emailed a guy once, a biologist, and I was like, hey, what's up with this season date? Because I was mad about something. It didn't line up with the break I had, my leave dates or something. And he goes, well, Caleb, Mississippi duck season lasts a total of 60 days every year. Because what it was is my friends in Louisiana were able to hunt longer than we were.
Yeah.
Into February. And no, it ended like halfway through January. They were hunting to the end of January.
Right.
And I was like, how does this work? How do they have more days than we do? And he was like, well, as a matter of fact, every hunting season is 60 days long. So you're getting the same amount of days, but it just turned out that it always ends the last weekend in January.
Right.
So it ended like the 25th, and I was like, dude, they're taking 5 days from us.
Right.
Right. And he was like, so it ends, you get 60 days and it ends the last weekend in January. And I was just like, oh my God. I was like, I'm an idiot,
Yeah.
for not doing the math on that. All right.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you on the flip side. Sorry if this was a rough one. It's only our second podcast, but we will get better, I promise. And we'll see you next week. Thanks so much.